I'm going to show you an example of using a parameterized test. What we're basically going to do is we're going to create a test that will allow us to specify a series of inputs for protein that we're going to either add or remove, and then what the result should be each step along the way. Now, we could do this with a regular test, like these tests we have here. We could basically add some protein and then assert along the way each step, but let's go ahead and use the parameterized test just to see how we could do that, and so that we could have each step be a test itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call this parameterized tests. And what we're going to do inside here is we're basically going to give this a run with, and we're going to say that this runs with the parameterized class. This will make it a parameterized test. And then what we need is we'll need some parameters. So I'm going to do this at parameters. Then I'm going to create a public static list of object arrays. And this is what we're going to return from this method called data. We'll go ahead and do the imports. And the idea is that we're going to return back for each input and expected result a single array. So we're going to combine that all together to make a list of these. It'll make a little bit more sense when we type this out. Let's take a look here. We're going to do a return, and then we're going to do arrays.as list in order to get a list from this array we'll be creating. And we'll do new object array of arrays. Then let's initialize this. And all we're going to do is we're going to put inside here some arrays, and it's just basically going to be a pair. It's going to be the input and then the expected result. So let's say that we add 5 grams of protein. We'll expect that the total should be 5. And then for our next test case, we're going to say if we add 5 more, now the total should be 10. Then we want to say if we subtract 12, well, the total should be 0 because it shouldn't go below 0. 10 minus 12 would be negative 2, but we don't want it to ever go below 0. Then we'll add 50. It should be 50. And then let's say we add 1. Should be 51. So that's our test data. Now, I happen to be setting this up in a way that we're counting on reusing our class. So we're going to need to create a static version of our object that we're going to test. Let's go ahead and just do that now. We're going to do a private static, and this will be our tracking service. And we'll call this service, set it equal to a new tracking service. Go ahead and do the import. And the reason why I'm making the static again is because we want this to stick around, because we're going to be manipulating this one object and we're going to be trying these different test cases. Many times when you do parameterized testing, you might not want to do this. You might want to just use a new instance of your object every time. In fact, in many cases, that will probably be what you'd want to do. But in this particular case, this makes sense for us to do here so that we could really test this tracking service and see how it responds to different inputs when we already have some state. So there's really a lot of flexibility with these parameterized tests. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a constructor. So we're going to do public parameterized tests. And this constructor is going to take an input and an expected value. Then, of course, we need to set these values. So we'll assign this parameter to a field. By the way, that Eclipse shortcut is Control-1, and then you can just do assign parameter to a new field. I really like how Eclipse has this type of stuff built right into it. This is going to be our constructor. For each one of these, it's going to construct a new instance of our parameterized test class, pass in an input and expected value to our constructor, which is going to get stored into our object, and then it's going to run our test method. Let's create our test method now. We'll do @test and public void test. And then inside here, we're going to do something a little bit strange. We're going to check, and we're going to say if the input is greater than or equal to 0, well, then we're going to call service.addProtein and pass in the input. Now, if it's not, Then we're going to call service.removeProtein, and we're going to pass in negative input. The reason why we're doing this is because with our service, remember there's a difference between adding and removing. We may have put negative numbers in here, but we just did this for the data. It doesn't represent the real data until we parse this data. The idea is that we're trying to represent these values. Now we could have somehow used some syntax like A5, A5, R12 to say add, remove, but I thought it'd be probably a little bit easier if we just used a value and then we converted it here. And we want to call remove protein when we have a negative value by flipping that value instead of calling add protein with a negative value, because add protein doesn't do that check to make sure we can't go below 0. Let's go ahead and now do our assert. We need to do an import. Let's do import static org.junit.assert.star. This will make sure that we have access to all those asserts, and then we're going to say assert equals, and then our expected value is going to be expected, and our actual value will be service.getTotal. Now let's go ahead and run this parameterized test set. And you can see all 5 tests ran, and they're labeled 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the index values. This is working. If we had a problem with one of these, let's say we said this should be 1, and we ran this, then you can see that that particular one fails.